Do you know this guy, Andrew Weaver? He's an anti-oil sands extremist from Victoria, BC. And you know what I mean by an anti-oil sands extremist? They're all the same. They claim to hate oil and gas, but only ever criticize oil and gas from Canada, never from OPEC giants like Saudi Arabia and Iran. They claim to hate oil and gas, but boy, do they love to use oil and gas themselves, jetting around the world, using fossil fuels themselves for their very important lives while telling the rest of us not to. They participate in foreign-funded, foreign-orchestrated smear campaigns against Canadian jobs, like when Weaver mugged for the cameras with Neil Young, the millionaire American celebrity who jetted up to Canada to smear our oil sands, actually comparing them to Hiroshima, while Weaver, who purports to be a scientist, just stood by and said nothing about that unscientific, vicious smear. Yeah, really, they're all the same, aren't they? But Weaver is actually different from most Canadian environmental extremists. I have to say most eco-activists in Canada who smear our country, who attack our jobs, even the ones who break the law, like the criminals who broke into the Line 9 oil pumping station in Ontario some months back, they dish it out, but they can take it too. That is, they smear our country, they call us names like climate criminal, but when, at least in my case, when I criticize them back, they take it, or at least they ignore it, because they realize they're vicious political campaigners and they expect occasionally that someone will criticize them back. Not Andrew Weaver. He's different. He's acting like a bully, like many environmentalists are, but he's the worst kind of bully. He's a thin-skinned bully. He likes to smear others, the oil sands, pipelines, oil companies, the government. He sits on stage with know-nothing bigots like Neil Young, who attack our country, while Weaver sits in silence. He's a bully who's friends with other bullies. But God forbid you dare to criticize him. He'll sue you. He'll try to destroy you in court by using our laws to silence you. It's lawfare. It's SLAP suit. SLAP stands for Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation. I'm not sure just how many global warming skeptics Weaver has sued. It's quite a few from what I can tell. But not everyone who is bullied that way goes public about it. There could be many more. I emailed Weaver and his lawyer this morning to ask him how many people he's sued, and I'll let you know what he says. But we know that Weaver has sued our friend Dr. Tim Ball for, amongst other things, for, quote, lacking a basic understanding of climate change. That's what Dr. Ball said about Weaver, as according to a glowing New York Times article that was cheering on this SLAP suit. Seriously? You're suing someone in a court of law because someone said you don't understand global warming? This is someone who is a scholar, an academic, a teacher, and now a politician. Weaver is an opposition politician, no less. He's now a Green Party MLA in British Columbia, someone who hurls insults as part of his job description, someone who's built a career out of slurring and smearing Canada in the oil sands, and yet he is so thin-skinned that he'll sue someone else who's saying that he, Weaver, doesn't understand things. Is that even an actionable lawsuit? Could you imagine? Could you imagine if he ran his classroom at the University of Victoria in that way? Imagine being a skeptical student wanting to ask a provocative question of your professor. Would he sue you for that too? But it's not just Tim Ball that he sued. Right now in BC this week, he is suing the National Post and several of its writers for, again, daring to criticize him. Here's a loving article about his lawsuit in the Guardian newspaper of the UK. They love the fact that he's suing global warming skeptics. And he loves that they love him. He posed for that picture, the hero of their story. See, he's free to criticize you and me and Canada and jobs. He sits by smiling like an oaf as Neil Young smears our country with lies. No problem for him. But the National Post criticizes him and he sues them, whining to the courts like a bully who for once gets his nose punched in return, and he doesn't like it one bit. But here's the dumbest thing about the trial. The National Post articles that he's suing over, they were written in 2009. 5 years ago. Nobody remembers them. Nobody talks about them anymore. They surely haven't damaged Weaver's career. He's a global warming celebrity, the toast of the New York Times and the UK Guardian. He's an international hero to the left, not just for his political views, but for attacking those whose views he doesn't like. Sorry, that's not what true academics do. That's not what politicians do, especially opposition politicians. Andrew Weaver is acting like a thug, not a scholar or a public servant. He is trying to sue, to censor, and punish his enemies, not to debate his opponents. See, politicians debate. Academics debate. Thugs don't bother with debate. They try to crush and silence. But here's another question I have for Weaver, and I sent it to him this morning by email, and I sent it to his lawyer too, and I'll let you know when they reply. How does Weaver pay for it all? I mean, a professor makes about $100,000 a year, maybe a bit more. An MLA in British Columbia makes just over $100,000. So he's not poor, but he's not rich. After taxes, he's doing okay. But he's hired Vancouver's premier defamation lawyer, Roger McConkie, a very expensive lawyer. The same law firm that Maclean's magazine actually hired to defend them against the nuisance human rights complaints brought by the censorious thugs at the Canadian Islamic Congress, which is a shame. McConkie's now taking on clients who are bringing censorship and nuisance suits after working so diligently against the Canadian Islamic Congress and their censorship. But hey, money's money, right? But that's the thing. McConkie is very expensive. A 5-year litigation, extremely expensive. I know that from personal experience, having been the target of a few nuisance suits from the censors on the left. Hiring a lawyer like Roger McConkie for 5 years and then running a full trial, there is simply no way that is less than $100,000 in fees, maybe $200,000 in fees. And that's after-tax money. Sorry, I do not believe that Andrew Weaver, who's earning probably $70,000 a year after taxes, I don't believe he can afford that. I just don't believe it. This morning, I emailed Weaver and asked him and his lawyer how much he has spent on this lawsuit and if he was taking any financial support to sue his enemies. I suspect he is, because the environmental movement in Canada is bankrolled by billionaire bullies from foreign jurisdictions. Like the Rockefeller brothers, their anti-Canada, anti-oil sands campaign that specifically says paying for litigation is their chief tactic. They said it. Did Weaver take any foreign money? Any foundation money, any environmentalist money, hell, any charity money to pay for his nuisance lawsuits? I'll let you know if they email me back. Weaver's not alone. In the United States, Michael Mann, a global warming activist, has sued our friend Mark Stein and National Review magazine for criticizing Mann's so-called hockey stick graph that's the basis of so much junk science about global warming. You'll remember the hockey stick, now widely debunked. It was the key piece of propaganda for global warming extremists like Al Gore that purports to show that for an eternity carbon dioxide and temperatures were low, but then suddenly they veered up in the past few years as we started to burn fossil fuels. The hockey stick was bad science. It was adjusted to make it look that way. Stein called it fraud, not a criminal fraud, but fraud in the common usage of that word, which sounds pretty fair to me, certainly fair enough in the rough and tumble debate that Mann voluntarily enters into every day himself as a global warming smearer. He's always smearing someone, attacking someone, and like Weaver, the one time someone criticizes him back, boom, he rushes to court to censor his opponents. But Mann is a serial liar. He has claimed repeatedly that he won the Nobel Prize, but he didn't. I mean, that's a fraud right there, isn't it? He only stopped doing that when Mark Stein embarrassed him into admitting he actually didn't win the Nobel Prize. And I think it goes to Mann's personality. He's an exaggerator, a media hound, someone who doesn't put science or facts first. No wonder he's suing Mark Stein, and no wonder his hockey stick was junk. I have no idea if Weaver or Mann will win their lawsuits. I haven't delved deeply enough into the statements of claim or defense, but I know this from what I've read. They're not really lawsuits about an obscure column that was written 5 years ago in the National Post. It's not really about what Mark Stein said about Mann's scientific rigor. This is about two big bullies, Weaver and Mann, who love to attack their enemies at will, but they're not man enough to take criticism themselves. Not being scholarly enough to engage in debate, not being big boys enough to ignore the odd insult. This is about censorship. It's about silencing of critics. And you know what? The only media that has reported on the Weaver trial so far is Post Media itself that owns the National Post. Here you have a celebrity politician, a Green Party hero, a famous scholar, Andrew Weaver, suing to censor critics and to punish Canadian media who dare defy him. Put aside the substance at issue of the lawsuit. The fact of the lawsuit itself is a scandal. And yet the rest of Canada's compliant media party don't even mention this suit. Could you imagine if an oil company were to try to sue their critics into silence? It would be front page news nationally. A global warming hero sues to smash his enemies, and the media party is complicit. Andrew Weaver deserves to lose his lawsuit. Not just to lose his censorship lawsuit, but his next election too. The man is a disgrace to the academic principle of free debate. And he's the perfect symbol of the brittle, thin-skinned global warming lobbyists who can dish it out, but they sure can't take it.